So imagine you're in a rock band. You've got a festival gig coming up fast, the pressure is really mounting, and you desperately need a name.
Which is honestly the hardest part of starting a band, right?
Exactly. So you're sitting in your car, racking your brain, looking at the mess on the floorboards, and staring back at you from the clutter is just this random sports trading card.
See, that sounds like the setup to a punchline. Like you expect the next sentence to be, and that's how we became the Toyota floor mats.
Right. But that is the literal origin story of the Quebec rock band Les Dales Hawerchuk. Band member Sylvain Seguin is sitting there, looks down, sees an NHL hockey card for a guy named Dale Hawerchuk, and just decides, yep, that's the name of the band.
It's so random.
It is. And the best part is they actually track down the real Dale Hawerchuk later to get permission to use his name.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Yeah, and Hawerchuk gives them his blessing, but with one specific kind of hilarious condition. He just says, just don't go to jail.
That is just the absolute perfect tone setter for this band. I mean, it tells you exactly who they are before you even hear a single chord.
It really does. And what we're doing today is a deep dive into a comprehensive retrospective that charts their 20-plus year history.
Which is a long time in the music business.
A very long time. Because
No.
their story presents this fascinating puzzle for us to unpack. You have a band from a small provincial town that forged a 2-decade-long career by doing essentially the exact opposite of what the modern music industry demands.
Yeah, they really broke all the rules.
They never polished their sound, they never chased mainstream radio play, and they stayed fiercely, unapologetically tied to their local roots.
And, to understand how they pulled that off, how they survived for 20 years playing loud, fast guitar music, you really have to understand the soil they grew in, because context is just everything here.
Right, the hometown factor.
Exactly. We were talking about a band that formed in Roberval, which is in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region of Quebec. This is an environment defined by incredibly harsh winters, a very robust local cavern culture, an intense pride in the French language, and a borderline obsessive love for hockey.
Which means they aren't trying to emulate a scene from somewhere else, right? Usually the playbook for a rural rock band is to pack up the van, move to the biggest city you can find, and start sanding down your rough edges to fit an urban market.
Oh, totally. That's the standard industry pipeline.
But Les Dales Hawerchuk entirely ignored that playbook. They weren't trying to sound like the cool kids in Montreal or Toronto. They were trying to capture the exact feeling of Roberval.
Yeah, a place where spending the afternoon making an incredible amount of noise in your garage and spending the evening screaming at a hockey game at the local bar are essentially the exact same cultural ecosystem.
Right. And that brings us to their formation around 2005, I think.
Yeah, around 2005, you have brothers Sylvain and Sébastien Seguin at the core, Pierre Fortin on drums, and Martin Bergeron on bass, though Charles Perron eventually steps in to solidify that classic lineup.
Gotcha.
And you really have to look at what was happening in the broader Quebec music scene at that specific time to understand why their approach was so radical.
Because it was a very specific era for indie music, right? The vibes were very distinct.
Very distinct. The late 90s and early 2000s in Quebec were just dominated by incredibly sophisticated, intellectually heavy music.
Okay.
On one hand, you had post-rock bands like Godspeed You, Black Emperor, who were getting massive international acclaim for these sweeping 20-minute instrumental orchestral movements.
Right. Very serious art.
Exactly. And on the other hand, you had these very clever avant-garde indie pop bands like Malajube. The entire critical scene was hyper-focused on music that was smart and complex.
And into that environment walks Les Dales Hawerchuk, who, from the sounds of it, weren't trying to paint a delicate masterpiece for an art gallery. I mean, it sounds like they were trying to build a ridiculously fast engine in their backyard and completely didn't care if it was missing the hood as long as it ran loud.
That is exactly the dynamic. And what's crucial is that this wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate aesthetic rejection of that whole intellectual scene.
They knew exactly what they were doing.
Oh, absolutely. They were prioritizing a purely physical reaction over an intellectual one. Like if you break down this sonic pie chart of their early sound, you're looking at about 40% raw garage rock, 30% manic punk energy.
That's a lot of punk energy.
Oh, definitely. And then 15% rockabilly swing and 15% massive stadium-sized arena choruses.
It's music designed to bypass the brain entirely. It just hits your nervous system and makes your body move before you even have a chance to overthink the time signature.
Right. It's loud, distorted guitars, tempos that feel like a 100-meter dash, and vocals that are essentially shouted with maximum conviction.
Yeah.
But the secret weapon, the thing that kept it from just being a wall of noise, was their undeniable knack for extremely catchy melodic hooks underneath all that aggression.
Okay, I want to stop you right there, though, because this
Mhm.
brings up a huge tension point for me based on the source material.
Oh, what's that?
Well, I just don't buy that this kind of energy is easy to put on a record. Like, we've all seen this happen. You have a band that relies entirely on sweaty, drunken tavern energy. They're incredible live.
Right.
But then they get a record deal, they step into a sterile recording studio, a producer puts them on a click track to keep perfect time, isolates all their instruments, and suddenly the vibe dies instantly. The album sounds like a taxidermied version of the live show.
It's so true. It happens all the time.
Right, so if their entire appeal is unrefined chaos, how on earth did they not get ruined the second they tried to record their 2005 debut?
That is the exact trap that kills 90% of garage bands. The studio just sanitizes them. But Les Dales Hawerchuk survived it because of one specific person, Olivier Langevin.
Okay, who's that?
He's from the band Galaxy, which is a very heavy-hitting, highly respected group in the Quebec garage rock scene. He was actually brought in to produce their first 3 albums.
Ah, so they hired a producer who actually lived in their world. He wasn't some pop hit maker trying to fix them.
Precisely. Langevin understood that fixing them would ruin them. His job was fundamentally different from a standard producer. It's almost like, think of a wildlife photographer versus a portrait photographer.
Okay, I like that.
You can't pose a wild animal in a studio. You just have to set up the cameras in the brush and hope you capture it hunting.
That makes so much sense.
Right. Langevin didn't try to isolate everything perfectly or fix every slightly out-of-tune string. He allowed the microphones to bleed into each other. He managed to capture the ferocious, unrefined energy of their self-titled debut without sanding down any of the friction.
And it clearly resonated. I mean, that debut was a massive hit. It grabbed the attention of Adaskew and Gammy-Q, which, for context, are basically the Quebec equivalents of the mainstream Grammys and the Independent Music Awards.
Yeah, it was huge for them.
And the album featured this massive anthem track called Dale Hawerchuk, which instantly became an inescapable staple in sports arenas and live venues.
Because Langevin's restraint preserved the messiness, the record felt alive. It didn't sound like a collection of carefully engineered tracks. It sounded like you were standing in the middle of a crowded room with them.
Yeah.
It proved that in an era where rock music was getting increasingly sophisticated and navel-gazing, there was a massive, starving audience for purely instinctual music.
Okay, I want to push back on something here, or at least challenge a premise. We keep bringing up hockey. The band is named after a hockey player. Their breakout song is named after a hockey player. Their whole vibe is sports bar.
Yeah, it's very present.
Is this just a gimmick? I mean, are they just throwing on hockey jerseys and singing about pucks to get a cheap pop from the hometown crowd? Because that feels like a novelty act that would wear off after one album.
It's a fair suspicion, honestly.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely not a gimmick. Hockey isn't just a lyrical theme or a costume for them. It is literally built into the structural mechanics of the music itself.
Wait, how do you build a sport into a song structure? Like, mechanically?
Well, think about the pacing of a hockey game. It's not slow and methodical like baseball.
Mm.
You don't have these long, self-indulgent 2-minute guitar intros.
Right.
The music drops the puck and instantly accelerates. It's a frantic sprint to the finish line, punctuated by sudden stops.
Oh, wow. So they are mimicking the physical exertion of a shift on the ice.
Exactly. And look at their choruses. They're structurally designed like sports chants. They aren't meant for a single, beautiful voice to sing softly. They are built for massive group enthusiasm.
Meant to trigger stadium-like sing-alongs.
Yes. They could be playing in a tiny, cramped rock club that holds 50 people. But the musical architecture of the song transforms that room into a sweaty sports arena.
And they really lean into this hard. Following their 2008 sophomore album, Les Dales Hawerchuk 2, they released their 2011 album, which actually wins a Gamma-Q award and is widely considered their mature masterpiece. And they double down on the sports obsession by literally titling the album Le Tour du Chapeau.
Which means hat trick. It's just brilliant. And this connects to a much larger cultural point, you know.
How so?
Well, in rural Canadian towns, hockey is a massive community-building apparatus. It's the social glue. By injecting the literal structure, pacing, and communal chanting of a hockey match into their rock shows, the band wasn't just performing music.
They were simulating a communal bonding experience.
Exactly. They were giving people that exact same feeling of shared local triumph you get when the hometown team scores in overtime.
That makes perfect sense. It's not about the sport, it's about the feeling of belonging that the sport creates. And from the source material, it seems like that deep desire to connect with the local community extended way beyond just the structure of the songs. It went right down to the syllables they sang and the specific accent they used.
Oh, man. This might be the most vital part of their 20-year legacy. We touched on this earlier, but the standard industry move is to relocate to the city and dilute your regional quirks.
Right, neutralize yourself.
Yeah, if you have a thick rural accent, a producer will often tell you to soften it so you can appeal to a broader, more cosmopolitan audience. But Les Dales Hawerchuk absolutely refused. They dug their heels into their Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean roots.
Because they sang entirely in the regional Quebec dialect, fully embracing what's known as Jewel slang. And for anyone unfamiliar, Jewel isn't just an accent. It's a working-class dialect characterized by specific dropped syllables, heavy nasal vowels, and harsh rhythmic consonants.
It is decidedly not standardized, proper French.
Not at all. To me, the refusal to drop the jewel is like an indie filmmaker who writes a brilliant, gritty script set in their hometown. The Hollywood studio executives read it and say, "We love the vibe, but can you change all the local slang so teenagers in Ohio can understand it?"
Right.
And the filmmaker says no, because the second you remove that local texture, you strip away the authenticity that made the art compelling in the first place.
That is a phenomenal analogy because the stakes here were very real. Within Quebec, there has always been a complex dynamic between the urban centers like Montreal and the rural regions.
Yeah, a bit of tension there.
Exactly. By singing in their specific unpolished regional jewel dialect, the Dales Hawerchuk were making a profound statement. They were asserting that rural, working-class voices like the guy sitting at the end of the bar in Roberval have just as much validity, power, and artistic merit as the urban elites.
They didn't have an inferiority complex about where they were from. They weren't asking Montreal for permission to be cool. They essentially said, this is how we talk, this is how we sound, take it or leave it.
And the local scene overwhelmingly decided to take it. They became absolute heroes in their region because people finally heard themselves reflected in the music without any filter or apology.
Which is incredibly powerful.
It is. But this uncompromising attitude eventually runs headfirst into a massive structural shift in the music industry.
Right. Because you can build a fiercely loyal fan base in the physical world, in the bars and the clubs, but then the 2010s happen and the entire music industry pivots dramatically.
Everything changes.
Suddenly, it's not about physical albums or local scenes. It's about digital streaming, algorithms, and frictionless playlists. Plus, garage punk is a young man's game. You cannot sustain that manic, redline energy indefinitely without burning out.
No, you really can't.
So how did they survive the rise of the algorithmic streaming era, especially considering they took a massive 5-year hiatus right in the middle of it?
Well, that hiatus was definitely the true test of their longevity. Following the massive success of Le Tour du Chapeau in 2011, they naturally slowed down. They took a 5-year break from releasing music.
Makes sense.
And when they finally returned in 2016, the landscape had completely transformed. Streaming was king, guitar-heavy rock music was being pushed entirely to the fringes in favor of highly polished, digital pop-centric sounds optimized for Spotify playlists.
And true to form, they don't try to blend in at all. They titled their 2016 comeback album Désavantage Numérique.
Which is, of course, another hockey term. It means being shorthanded, like when you're on a penalty kill.
Wow.
It is an incredibly self-aware, apt metaphor for a loud, unpolished guitar band trying to operate in a slick digital industry. They know they were a man down playing defense, but they are still on the ice refusing to quit.
And for that album, their drummer, Pierre Fortin, actually steps up to produce. The source material notes that they adopt a thicker, heavier sound. They don't try to pivot to indie pop. They don't suddenly add electronic drum beats to try and sneak onto a chill vibe streaming playlist. They just get heavier.
And that refusal to chase industry trends is the ultimate mechanism of their survival. Their entire power base was never built on industry hype. It was built on the live experience.
The physical connection.
Exactly. Their shows are a reciprocal ecosystem where the band feeds off the crowd's energy and the crowd feeds right back. Because they spent a decade building a tangible real-world community rather than just chasing a frictionless online following, The shift to streaming algorithms couldn't touch their core fan base.
Because you simply cannot algorithmically replicate the feeling of sweating in a crowded room with their neighbors screaming a chorus at the top of your lungs in your own dialect.
You really can't. An algorithm can recommend a song, but it can't simulate a community. And that physical foundation is so robust that in 2024, nearly 20 years into their career, they dropped their fifth album, Ataka Sank, which is the hockey term for a power play.
I love that they kept the naming convention going.
Oh yeah, 2 decades later, they are still on the ice, still loud, and still proving their longevity.
It's just a phenomenal achievement. When we step back and look at the 20-year journey of Les Dales Hawerchuk, they proved something pretty profound about the nature of success in art.
They really did.
They prove that you don't need to be perfectly polished. You don't need to be an intellectual avant-garde darling, and you don't need to move to a massive urban center to leave a huge mark on music history.
Not at all.
By blending the frantic, breathless physical exertion of a hockey sprint, the rough, unfiltered charm of a local tavern, and the fierce pride of their regional dialect, they created a legacy of joyous, communal rock and roll.
They remind us that true, uncompromising authenticity has a magnetic pull that no amount of studio magic or marketing budget can ever manufacture.
Which leaves you, listening right now, with a really interesting question to ponder. We live in an era where almost everything we consume is heavily optimized. The music on our playlists, the media on our feeds, the products we buy, they are all algorithmically designed to be as smooth, frictionless, and universally appealing as possible.
Everything's got the edges sanded off.
Exactly. But if Les Dales Hawerchuk succeeded entirely because they were delightfully unpolished and aggressively authentic, where is the unrefined garage rock in your own life? Where are you allowing things to be a little messy, a little loud, and entirely yourself? Something to think about the next time you're cleaning out your car and you happen to find an old piece of cardboard on the floor that just might change your life.